Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Well, welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara. And
go ahead.
We have a special guest.
Clara's daughter and Jimmy's sister.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes. So Alex is the courageous survivor who changed our lives forever. In a very good way, I think. Alex is the one who I mentioned in my book. She's the one who came forward on whenever Heather Sells did a special with CBN News. Alex is the one who disclosed abuse, and that's how Mom and I found out that our dad, your former husband, was an abuser. Up to that point, we had no idea. So, I can't believe, Alex, that it's been this long since we've invited you on the show. That's We've only been podcasting for over 2 years. But I finally was like, you know what? It's kind of a travesty to not have you on the show and to talk about it from your perspective. People have heard from our perspective,
exactly.
So I think it's time that they hear from your perspective. So I'll start a little bit for those who don't know how this kind of unfolded. I'll just give like a super abridged version of this, but I still remember the date, July 29th, 2011. Alex had scheduled a meeting with me. Mom, I think you had called me and kind of tipped me off that Alex was going to be scheduling an appointment with me.
I did. Alex, I was working in my office one evening, late at night. It was around midnight, when I received an email from Alex, who was sitting in her bedroom, which, we did that sometimes, just kind of shoot off a good night or a funny, email or something like that. Only this email was different. This email had a subject line of description of a pedophile. And that description and that email was the beginning of a big change, not only for our lives, for our families, but also, and thankfully, for the lives of many children to come. Thanks to Alex's sending that one email, that in return, I contacted Jimmy, and Jimmy, you can take it from there.
Yeah, so I was only 2 years into my job as a preacher at the church that we grew up at. That's the church that our dad preached at for 27 years. I was hired in June of 2009, so July of 2011, 2 years later, Alex was scheduling an appointment to come talk to me on a Friday afternoon. So Alex came up, and I don't think it's important to give a whole lot of details from that day. You probably don't want to relive it. But, Alex came in. She just said hello to me, handed me a piece of paper that was an email exchange between her and someone else that described a night that they were both abused by my dad. So that's how I found out. And I write about this in my memoir, The Devil Inside. From my perspective, what that was like sitting in my seat, having Alex across from me and disclosing that to me. So, long story short, I believed Alex immediately. I told Alex that the only thing I could promise her is that it stops now. And then I called Mom as soon as Alex left, and we both unanimously almost said at the same time, we need to report this. So we never entertained any other idea.
Let me say that Alex, with that email, then she and I spent, it was quite a horrific night that night together, as she shared with me the abuse. And Jimmy and I both had the same reaction. It was immediate belief in Alex. There was no hesitation whatsoever that we did not believe or understand the depth of what she was saying. And I still yet, this many years later, look at Alex. She's the youngest of our tribe of 11 kids. And I look at her with respect for the amount of courage that it took to do what she did. And believe me, that took a lot of courage, because this was not only going to change our lives as we knew it, the lives of our family, the lives of our community, the lives of those people in our church, but so many others. And she did it.
Yeah.
And that I think is real bravery.
Massive.
Yes.
So my question for you, Alex, because I try to think about this, and I mean, I've spoken to hundreds of survivors of abuse since that fateful day. I was in such a weird position, I think, for you, because one, I was somebody of the opposite sex. I was your brother, am your brother still. Just want to clear that up. I'm your brother. I am also your abuser's son, and I'm a minister, just like your abuser, at the church where he preached. So certainly from a victim's perspective, a lot of really difficult hurdles for you to overcome just to report to me. So what gave you the motivation and the courage to reach out to both Mom and I and to disclose abuse that day? What made you decide now's the time?
So I was 20 years old at the time. I was a college student, and I was home from college for the summer. Every summer while I was in college, I would come home and stay at Mom's for the summer and work. And my dad was babysitting kids at the time, and he had asked me twice towards the beginning of that summer to help him babysit kids. And both of those times, there were red flags that I picked up on from the kids that made me think that probably they were being abused. But I didn't have any physical evidence, and I really had no idea what to do. How can you report a gut feeling or a red flag with no hard evidence? And that's why I began to research the signs of an abuser and the signs of someone who has been abused. And then once everything clicked for me, first thing I thought of was telling Mom, hoping that she would kind of give me some guidance as to where to go from there. And she gave me the guidance to talk to you.
Go talk to Jimmy.
Go see Jimmy.
Luckily, all the things you said, being male, family member, preacher, none of that really discouraged me from talking to you, because I didn't have any reason to think I couldn't trust you. Like, no recollection of you ever doing anything but being, someone I could trust. So.
See, this is kind of interesting to me now, because in hindsight, I look at how rare it is for somebody in my position to believe as survivor, which blows my mind. I still can't wrap my mind around it. Yeah. But for you, like, I know you've seen it tons of times where friends of yours or people that you've interacted with who you never met before, who are survivors of abuse, they didn't have that same response. Mm-hmm. So, looking back now, do you think, holy crap, this could have wound up completely differently if I hadn't believed you?
Definitely could have. It's hard to think now what I would have done in that situation if you hadn't believed me. I would like to think that since my motivation was protecting the kids that I thought at the time were currently being abused, I would have gone to the police myself. But it definitely helped having that backup and someone, to help start the whole investigation process for me.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've talked about before is that we just make the assumption or have made the assumption that you didn't tell us just to get something off your shoulders.
No.
That survivors of abuse rarely tell somebody just because they want to get something off their chest. We started with the assumption, and I think just kind of naturally, we didn't talk about it. And you and I didn't talk about it. I wasn't like, well, Alex, what do you want me to do? I never asked Alex that. We just started with this gut assumption that you wanted action, that you wanted something to happen. And we were kind of the catalyst to make that happen. We were put in a position, whether we liked it or not,
Right.
and we didn't like it, but it didn't matter,
easy about any step of
Right.
this. There was nothing easy about from the very first step of Alex sending that email. The moment she hit send, life changed. It was going to change. Whether
Permanently.
Right. Whether it changed in the right direction that she wanted or not, life was going to change. Had I said, Alex, you are just out in left field. I don't think anything you're saying it doesn't make sense. Had I said that and stopped it right there, and she had had to go on to the police alone, which she would have. She was determined to protect those children. There would have been such a broken relationship in our family that I think never would have been able to be mended.
Which happens most of the time with
And
disclosures
and
of
I
abuse.
shudder to think about that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that was definitely one of my concerns. Like, I had a million hypotheticals running through my head at the time. Like, what's this going to do to our family? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen if I tell someone in the family and they, shut me out and, take Dad's side instead of mine? But I had to take the importance off of myself and put it on the kids who were being abused, because that was really all that mattered at the time.
Well, that brings up a whole nother subtopic. And that is the determination that the vast majority of abuse victims have to keep abusers from abusing other kids. And there's this myth out there that, if you've been abused, especially for male victims, if you've been abused, you're likely to be abusing kids too. And that's a question that people ask me routinely when I go places. They say, "Was your dad ever abused?" My answer is, "What does it matter?"
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. It depends on who you talk to, because he's told different people different things. But what does it matter if he's been abused? That doesn't determine whether somebody abuses somebody else. In fact, the vast, overwhelming majority of the time, and statistics, research shows this, that people who've been sexually abused will do everything in their power to make sure that never happens to any other kid.
Right.
And that's a case in point. I mean, just that sheer determination, because you know what it was like and what it's still like as an adult to have been abused as a kid. And it sucks. Like, there's no way around it.
Yeah.
And, victims will really fight tooth and nail to make sure that abusers are stopped. And as a church leader who consults with churches, and I train churches, and I hear from survivors from all different walks of life, church leaders interpret that as, boy, you're just bitter, like you haven't gotten over what happened to you, and we've all had stuff happen, and you don't see us standing on a soapbox and outing people who wronged us at every step of the way through life. And they don't understand that there's so much determination on the part of the abuser to keep abusing and to keep producing victims and to keep the secrecy. They do not stop. They do not stop abusing. So when survivors of abuse go to leaders at churches, or go to leaders at schools or whatever the organization is.
They are legislators also,
right.
for Pete's
sake. They're not
to help to protect the children. It's
yeah,
like,
they're not doing it
people.
because it's comfortable or
Yeah,
it's fun
no,
or
it's
it's
not
enjoyable.
easy. No.
They're doing it because they want to see some sort of action.
Yes.
They want to see abusers stopped.
Absolutely.
And that's it.
Right.
So were you surprised that we all believed you right away?
I mean, trying to look back on that day, I honestly don't even remember exactly what my expectations were because it was just completely overwhelming. So I can't say if I remember if I was surprised or not. I think what I remember feeling is relief. Like, okay, something is going to be done. I did what I could. And, you know, we're going to see this through. Something's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it was just a major
I
sense
love
of relief.
that word, relief, that you used, because in my mind, for years, and I blogged about it, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know what that something was.
But none of us suspected
Never
abuse.
in a million years.
I mean, none of us did.
Abuse that many years ago was not a public word. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had to read your email just over and over again because I had never said the word pedophile.
Yeah.
Ever. I had never used the word. Didn't know anything about pedophiles. It was,
nor did we know any pedophiles.
Nor did we know any pedophiles. Exactly. Now that word is commonplace. Little children know it. I mean, they've been taught the word abuse and all that. At that point in time, that was new knowledge. You know, and it's like, you know there's something there, your gut tells you, but you don't know what it is. And now it was the light bulb for me. Alex felt relief. So did I. The light bulb went off. Bingo. Now everything started fitting together. You know, all those, as you called, the red flags with the young children that you saw that he was with, babysitting, was like it was like a million movies, clips of movies flashing in my mind. And we did that all through the night as we cried. I remember laying on the bed, just holding each other and crying. And it was like those movie clips playing over and over. Everything fit. It fit. Finally.
Yeah.
Relief. I think I felt relief too. It was finally something, you know, made sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that's definitely one of the benefits to talking to other people about it, if they can actually take your side and support you and help you fit the pieces together. Because for me, as a victim, it was really strange, especially it being my own father. I just second-guessed everything, and like all I had were very small clips of flashbacks. Like, I don't remember how old I was or many specific details, just tiny little flashes of a memory where I would second guess myself, like, okay, maybe I'm remembering that wrong, maybe it wasn't really abuse, even though I didn't like this happened, maybe it wasn't wrong. And it was just so much going on in my head that, you know, I didn't know what to do with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you and Mom processing that together really helped to put those pieces to the puzzle together. For me, I was in kind of a different position because my role, I felt like my role was to see this through to the end.
And it was, and that's why we both leaned on you. You know, what do we do with this? We go to Jimmy.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I went to the police station together, but and we supported you. And I remember us saying, like, "Are you sure you want to go to the police station? That you're willing to speak? Because once we report, like, there's no backing out of that."
Right.
And Alex was, I mean, just as firm as could be from start to finish.
She was.
She was like, I
She was
need to do this.
She was a rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just that courage and your courage empowered other family members to come forward who had never told anybody, and all of you guys thought that you were the only one. Everybody within the family thought that they were the only one, which is really, really common for abuse victims, because that's what abusers do. They make you think, they isolate you, make you think that you're the only one, because the more they can push you off on this little island by yourself, it makes it nearly impossible to report, and that's all by design. And so, I'm so proud of the way that our family, from the very beginning, stuck with each other. All the brothers stuck by the sisters' sides. There was not one, I can't remember one single instance, with the exception of a couple family members that cussed me out for reporting. But that was short-lived. I think that's a normal response.
I think that was
because of the shock of it.
It was a shock.
But it wasn't like, why would you do that?
No.
He's innocent.
Right.
It was, we didn't have time to even think about this and process this.
And
like,
now it's
why
gonna be
you didn't talk to the family
over,
before
yeah.
reporting it, and we didn't.
No,
we didn't talk to anybody but Alex.
Yeah.
And that was on a Friday, right before I did a wedding rehearsal, then Saturday a wedding, and then Sunday preached, and then Monday morning we were in the police station reporting it. So this all happened really, really quickly. But yeah, I think looking back, I almost feel a little bit guilty telling people our story because it's so rare. It's so rare for, especially a family this big, for everybody literally to stick together always. We have never, it's been, almost 10 years now?
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a time where we were divided over this.
I think that's probably one of the biggest blessings we have as a family is the support.
Yeah.
That was there. And it was there. And I don't know what made it so strong, except that, I don't know, you cultivated that all growing up. You were a strong, close bunch of kids. But even within that strong, close unit, here we have a child saying there was abuse going on and no one knew it. Then you have another one who speaks up and says, well, I thought I was the only one.
Mm-hmm.
So even within strong family units, there can be those hidden secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that people need to understand. Abuse, the abuser knows this and is crafty and smart and articulate in the way they abuse. And they know most often they'll get away with it because there is this fear of crumbling a family, of crushing a family. And I think maybe your dad was counting on that.
I think that's what he used.
Yeah.
I've
Yes.
maintained contact with him, and one of the things that he's told me is I didn't threaten my victims because I didn't have to.
Yeah.
And there's this picture that out there in the advocacy world that abusers are looking for all these vulnerabilities. They're looking for the kid who has a bad home. They're looking for the kid who doesn't have daddy affection. They're looking for the kid who comes from in and out of foster care and those sorts of things. And they target those people and they shower them with love and they give them everything that they didn't have. I would say that for the vast majority of Dad's victims, the exact opposite was true. He targeted families that had a super strong bond, where there was a strong presence of a father. There were all these things that he used, but and he's talked to me about that, and he said there are people who do that, but he said the majority of abusers look at those people and we're like, those people are stupid because they're just lazy. So your average abuser, if you think about that for a minute, just how calculated and how evil and how twisted this is, your average abuser doesn't target kids with all these vulnerabilities and gaping holes in their lives. They target kids with normal, happy, healthy families. And I don't know that it's necessarily any more difficult for the abuser to do that than to find these vulnerable kids that are in broken homes. And I think that's what people need to understand is that anybody can be a target.
That's the whole point.
Level of education doesn't matter.
No.
Level of love within the home doesn't matter. Whether a home's broken or put together and really tight-knit doesn't matter. So
we are a prime example. It can happen to any family.
Absolutely.
Any family. We were in church 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
You kids loved church camp, loved, all of that.
All of us had a very normal, healthy social life. Lots of friends. We hung out all the time.
Active in school. That whole
good grades.
Nothing going on at home that would be like, wow. It was a happy home. It was a fun childhood for everybody. And yet, within this unit, there was all this travesty going on.
Yeah.
Without people, and it was a secret. It was a tight-held secret. And your dad, being the kingpin of it all, knew. And I think he felt real secure in that.
I know he did.
I don't think he felt at all vulnerable or at all that any one of the children would ever so-called betray him, because he was such a fun-loving, great dad.
Yeah.
And what a mixed feeling. I'm sure in your mind still there has to be so much. He was the fun one. I was the grouchy, the mom slamming cupboard doors and hollering and making rules, and he was not. He was the patient, kind, fun person. And I think he thought for sure he had his little army secured, but truth always wins. Always.
Well, I think that's what really shocked him, is that, and I have a really different perspective, and you and I have never spoken about this, so Alex is hearing this for the first time, but he was convinced that it was an accidental disclosure from one of the little girls that he was babysitting, because he couldn't figure out. He never, ever entertained the idea that an adult victim would have rolled on him. That didn't even enter his mind. He thought it was an accidental disclosure because he had overheard one of the little girls say, "Hey, I saw Mr. John's penis." One of the little girls had said something like that at church. So in his mind,
this is one of his.
Somebody heard that
one of his
and
other victims.
reported that.
Yeah.
Right. One of the little girls that Alex witnessed him interacting with. So, in his mind, there was an impossibility of an adult victim turning on him, and that's how much of a grip he thought he had.
How secure he felt.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely 100%
secure.
confident.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I know this is a hypothetical question for you, Alex, because it didn't, obviously it turned out very differently, but what do you think would have happened if we hadn't believed you? If even one of us hadn't believed you?
I think I would have felt even more isolated and afraid, and maybe I would have second-guessed myself as far as reporting. Like, it might have taken me a little bit longer to work up the courage to go to the police on my own, but I think ultimately I still would have made that decision, because I didn't think in my mind, like, knowing this was most likely happening to these kids, I don't think I could have just let that go and kept quiet.
Yeah. I think it just shows the importance, too, of believing whenever people disclose abuse. And that, like, I have a whole chapter on this in my book where I talk about beginning with righteousness and justice. Like, that's this foundation that's found in the Bible, and whether you believe in God or not, like, it doesn't matter. There's still this foundation that's foundational for our lives, where there's righteousness and justice. And that term for righteousness was actually a term that was used in the marketplace for balancing scales. It literally means, righteousness means beginning with balanced scales. You don't tip the scale in either direction for anybody. So you don't tip it and say, well, we see this with racism all the time, right? Well, they're they're just the black kids that live in the projects. You're tipping that scale against somebody.
Right.
But the same is true where you can tip the scales in favor of somebody. Well, I mean, gee, Alex, this is what tipping the scales would look like. Well, gee, Alex, I grew up in the same house as you, and I've never seen anything weird with him.
Right.
I've known him my whole life, and where's this coming from? That's tipping the scale in favor of somebody, where you're banking on your relationship, your emotional connection, your peer relationship, whatever it is. You're tipping the scale in favor of somebody, and you're disregarding the facts that are in front of you. So, to begin with balanced scales, and this notion of justice, where you're going to mete out whatever is owed somebody, good or bad. So I think what's interesting about that whole idea is that that's what abuse victims constantly have to do to survive. It's this suspension of everything they think they know about somebody and saying, holy cow, something's not right with the way this person's treating me and the things they're doing to me. And I think it becomes so incredibly confusing for victims when they're able to mete out righteousness and justice properly, as a survival technique, if nothing else. And then they look at church leaders or family members or both, and they're like, wait a second, like, you're banking on your golf games that you played with this guy as a defense for him molesting and raping and humiliating me?
Yes.
Like, it doesn't compute, and it can't compute. It can't make sense in any normal world, and that's why I really try to get people to realize that appealing to me, and I think this is what maybe makes me a little bit unique, but if people try to appeal to me on the basis of the relationship that they've had with the person who's the subject of the allegations. And
Let's
I'm like,
put this in simple terms. In the community, I have had numerous people come up to me and say, still, what a shame that he is in prison because he helped so many people reach God. So based on that, it's like they want to tip the scales up this way, and it doesn't work. Cannot work.
Doesn't the
will
good
not.
outweigh the bad?
Right.
And those sorts of things.
He did so much good. Oh, he did. But bring it up here. He also did so much bad.
Right.
Yeah. So
Well, I think for me, it's taken years to sort of let go or change that concept of duality, that someone is either all good or all bad, because I guess that was something that was really hard in my mind to grasp when I first had it. The concrete evidence, yes, he's an abuser, yes, he did abuse me. It was then, okay, what about all the good memories I have with him? So was that all manipulation, or was he really a good parent in some ways? Did he actually love me? Did he not? And it was overwhelming. But you have to separate all of those instances and just think good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things. It's not like a one or the other in every case.
I appreciate what you said so much, Alex, because for those who are wives of abusers who may be listening, the struggle is real in that aspect too. I go through that every day. Was there really love for me? Or was there this intent that, hey, I'm going to marry her and we're going to have a lot of children, and that will give me access to a lot of children? Because we talked about family before we got married while we were dating, and I wanted a big family, and it was like, yes, he did too, and all of this, and you feel so totally mixed up in your mind. How could he love me yet abuse my children? How does that happen? How to harm one of our children? So I totally get what you're saying, that the struggle is real. It's very real.
I think what's helped me bring some clarity to that is separating that even farther and saying, all right, yeah, like, we'll never make sense of that if we think in terms of good and bad, and like we all do good things, we all do bad things. Like, there are things in my life that I hope never come to light, right? Like, all of us have these things that we do. But then in the Bible, you have this really clear picture of deception and people masquerading as good people while they're doing really horrific things intentionally, willfully, and joyfully. They're doing those things knowing the harm that it's bringing on their victims, and they're doing it anyway. There's this distinction between those people and people like the three of us who we wrestle with different temptations and different things, whether it's, driving like a maniac and speeding everywhere we go, or whether, you know what I mean? Like whether it's gossip, whether it's addiction, self-harm kind of stuff. Like all of us have these vices that we know what it's like to wrestle with and to have those things overcome us, but we also know what it's like to overcome those things and to pull out of it and to be racked with guilt and all that stuff. That's not what abusers do, though. And they don't operate anywhere close to how we operate. And that's what people really need to understand.
I think two words you use, Jimmy, I'll interject and I'll let you finish: deceit and willful.
Yeah.
Two things: deceit and willful. Just knowing 100% this is going to harm this girl, and I'm going to come off as the best mom in the world while I'm harming her in the worst possible way.
Right.
That's an abuser.
That's right.
That's an abuser.
So it's all masquerading, but it's not masquerading because you're trying to cover your own sins.
No.
Because addicts do that, right? Drug addicts, alcohol addicts.
Yeah.
Like they'll lie about their addiction to try to cover up what they're doing because they're racked with guilt and shame.
Yeah, this is different.
And that's self-harm, but this is others' harm, where you're willfully, intentionally deceiving other people in order to steal away that which doesn't belong to you. It belongs to your innocence belonged to you. Your sexuality belonged to you. That was stolen from you. Yes. And the abuser, we can't. I think we need to move beyond this idea of good and bad, and I think that's why and I wrestle with it too, because I go back and I think about all the good stuff too, and I'm like, man, 98% of my memories growing up were positive memories. Yeah. They were fun, they were good, they were nurturing, and all these other things. But it was only until I could realize, okay, it's not that he had a good side and a bad side. It wasn't this Jekyll and Hyde. It was his DNA makeup is a liar and a deceiver to his core. And he still is a liar and a deceiver to his core. And there's this distinction where when you realize, wait a second, these guys, they open their mouths and they lie. And I know you read Anna Stalter's book, but there's a quote in there where she asks him something to the effect of how do you pull off all these lies? And he said, you're asking the wrong question, Dr. Stalter. You assume that when I'm abusing, that's when the lies begin. But in reality, every single time I open my mouth, I'm lying.
It's a lie. Yeah, it is.
And that's
hard,
really
though, for
really eye-opening.
Who, when it's your relative, your father, your husband, your brother, your mother, it's hard, and you do wrestle. As humans, we wrestle with that. Well, gee, was I ever really truly loved?
Yeah.
Did that ever mean anything? But
yeah.
That's just one of the, I think, after effects of abuse that survivors have to wrestle with forever. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Alex, did having us report right away? We reported. Let's see. You came to me on a Friday. I think Mom the day before. Monday morning, we were in the police station reporting. So this all happened really quickly. Did us reporting that bring a sense of justice and closure to you?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Yes, it goes back to that feeling of relief that he was going to be out of the general population and in prison, so he couldn't get to any more kids to abuse them. But then it opened up this whole guilty complex within myself, that why didn't I know how to report sooner? Like, why didn't I have the tools or the knowledge to tell someone when I was a kid, and how many more people could I have protected if I would have said something years earlier? So I don't think I'll ever, feel full closure in that aspect of things, but, I'll never regret reporting, and I'll, always be grateful that he's in prison where he belongs.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a component that we probably need to talk a lot more about with survivors, because we hear it, and I think the words are there, but I think it's so hard to compute with your person that when you're a kid, I mean, I look at my Isaac is 5 years old. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's not almost 6, but I look at him and I'm like, if he were having the most horrific, painful, humiliating horror scene being marked out for him in the privacy of a home by somebody who claimed to love him and care for him, and that horror scene was playing out in his life, like just now, me as a parent of that child, in a million years I couldn't imagine being like, well, Isaac, why couldn't you figure it out? Mm-hmm. I know we talked last week about training kids, but ultimately, in the end, we can train them so far. But abusers are highly sophisticated. Highly sophisticated.
In all of this, yes. In a child's mind, how do you decipher all of that mixed up? This is somebody who loves you one minute, who's feeding you, clothing you, taking you on trips, and the next moment they're hurting you in the most painful way, but you don't even understand if it's okay, if it's not. Lots of times they tell you, this is just another form of love. Mm-hmm. This is how I'm loving you, So how does a child understand that?
And that's something, I mean, when we had Judge Aquilino on the show, she was really adamant, and she's like, make sure that you're careful when you're talking about this, to where you don't even make it sound like it's the responsibility of that kid to report and to defend themselves, because at the end of the day, they're kids. You were a kid, so and you had virtually no, and then very fragmented memories. So it's not like you had this stack of journals and it was all written out and you knew exactly what was happening when it was happening. Like, you didn't have that. And I talk about this when I do trainings, like the amount of information that you and I had from you was really not a lot of information at all, because I think you didn't have a lot of information, including from your own abuse.
Yeah, no evidence, because, like I said, I don't even know what year or years it happened.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that gets into a whole nother topic, too, about standing with victims when they're trying to report, because it's not as if your memories work the way my memories work or your memories work. Like, your memories very typically are incredibly fragmented, and there is that duality where you're trying to make sense of your memories that are coming back, and it's just really, really gray.
Well, any trauma event is like that, and even for me to remember beyond the email, and I remember you and I crying, I remember hugging you. I don't remember words that we said. I don't remember anything except, we need to talk to Jimmy. How do you want to do that? Do you want to go by yourself, or do you want me to go with you? But beyond that, there's no memory. It was the trauma. So I can't imagine a child experiencing abuse to remember details. How's that happen? You want to block that out.
And it's such a process
to survive.
Yeah, yes. It's really a process. So to sit with victims and to have the patience, but instead they hear things like, "Well, Why are you just now telling? Why are you just now
Yeah.
reporting? Why
didn't you?
What do
come
you
to me
mean you don't
years
have
ago?
memories?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
if you don't have memories, then why are you telling me this? These little bits and pieces, and you expect a police officer to do anything with that? Those are the kinds of things that victims hear constantly. And I don't know. Like, people ask me a lot when I do trainings. They're like, "How did you know how to believe your sister? And how did you know how to go to the police? And how did you know, all the things that we did?" And at the end of the day, it's common sense.
Yeah, that's what
it is.
It's
always
not rocket
question.
science.
Why would someone want to make any of this up?
Right.
Like, why would I want to talk about any
Bingo.
of this
Right.
if it
Why
didn't
would
actually happen?
Right.
You, at age 20, want to start a process that could potentially destroy your whole family, all the relationships that you had. Why?
Right.
I
You had-
love that. Perfect.
Yeah,
Alex.
I mean,
perfect. Yes.
You had
right.
everything to lose
Yes.
and very little to gain.
Yes. Yes.
So, people need to remember that too. This isn't
Right.
something that they're like, "Oh, I'm going to make this up." And that's the thing too. Like, if somebody's going to make something up about somebody, it's not going to be sexual abuse. 99% of the time. It's going to be something that people might look down on somebody,
this
but
is not fun.
yeah, people
police
don't
is
make
not
up
fun.
allegations of
There
sexual
was the
abuse.
potential of a trial. Alex, being 20, knew that would not be fun.
Right.
There was potential of dragging other people, other people being brought into this. This would not be fun. Why would somebody age 20, a young lady, even want to begin that? Or any abuse victim? Why?
Yeah, they wouldn't.
They wouldn't. Is the thing that Alex and you were trying to drive home. They wouldn't.
Yeah.
It makes much more sense to believe the story. Believe it.
Yeah.
Whether there is every fact available or not, and it's not going to be. Any of us that went through anything traumatic, we can't remember every detail. Those things happen. They come in flashes to us. And sometimes many, many years later, I still have flashes of when I was a child of things that happened. And I'm ready to kick the bucket, really. So
You're getting there. I mean, we're so
getting
close,
there.
so close to
Getting there.
putting you in a nursing home.
Oh, stop that.
Me and Alex have been doing financial planning, trying to figure out how we're going to afford this.
I know you've been contacting the whole family, and you're all solid on this.
Man, I guess final question. We could go forever, and I'm
know,
trying to look at the time.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just have to do a part 2, Alex, sometime.
There you go.
But what would be your message to abuse victims who are living with their secret of abuse and they've never told anybody?
I think for me, the biggest benefit, other than of course protecting the kids that was happening to, the biggest benefit was starting my whole healing journey. I had been living with symptoms of anxiety and depression, eating disorders, self-harm pretty much my whole life, and it was never until I actually connected the dots and started talking about it that I was ever able to start any kind of healing process. And so I would tell survivors or victims of abuse that even if you can't talk to your own family about it, there are people out there who will listen. There are therapists and coaches and maybe friends, random people on the internet. Like, the whole world shares their life on social media nowadays. You can find other people like you without even really having to try, I think.
Yeah, support groups now are, it's a lot different than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We've have some really solid groups, solid advocates. There are people out there, that you can share your story with. And sometimes, I mean, for some people, I think it would be easier to tell a complete stranger.
Yeah, I think so too. Because then you don't have to worry about, is someone going to believe you or not if they don't actually know you.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of wisdom in what the two of you say, and I think you don't totally grasp it sometimes. I appreciate so much, Alex, your willingness to talk publicly. It's not easy at all. Abuse is such a sensitive topic, and I appreciate your courage as a mother of you. I still stand amazed. Jimmy, the same is true for you. There was no hesitation. You adored your dad. I mean, you followed in his footsteps.
And Alex knew that when she told
Alex
me.
knew
She
that.
knew the
And
relationship we
to see
had.
the two of you who stand strong and stand together, and for a mother, there's no greater thing. I can say that. And I appreciate, I would love to hear more. I hope we can have Alex as a guest again sometime in the future, near future. I think she has so much wisdom to share, and you do so in such a poised and confident way. When you talk about your healing journey, I think people need to hear a little bit more of your healing journey. And it is a journey, and it is healing. And I think that shows in you the calmness you now have, as you know, you're opposed to how anxious you were, and just all the fears you had. And now I see a poised young lady, married, business lady. Just, you know, I see so many wonderful things happening, and I think people would like to hear about that more.
Yeah, there's our story, it's a story of hope. I mean, it is. People, it's interesting. Church people want to hear how we've reconciled with my dad and how he's changed his life, and I'm like, that's not our story at all. That's not our story.
No.
But our story is a story of hope. It's a story of
it's a beautiful story
of us still having all kinds of struggles. Still, our family has a lot of heartache and heartbreak. But we're a family that sticks together, and we help each other out, and we're all supportive of each other.
And when you can see a member of your family on this healing journey, and you witness the healing taking place, is beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So, who wants to come up with the truth bomb?
I think...
Granny, you always have some... you drop some wisdom.
I think... Well, today has been a joy. That's all there is to it. I think that when we do take that first step, that first right step, that there is always going to be somebody there to help us fall in line and support us. And I appreciated what you said, Alex, that if it's not your family, there are therapists, there are coaches, go online, there's help available, and there is hope. So I want to leave that with all people today.
Absolutely.
There is hope.
Well,
Yes.
Alex, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron, and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.